I never thought I'd see such cruelty in Frank's eyes, not after 42 years of marriage. But there he stood, champagne flute raised high at our anniversary dinner, a slight smirk playing on his lips as he toasted to my final days. The crystal chandelier of Burlington's most exclusive restaurant cast prisms of light across his face, illuminating the darkness I'd been blind to for decades. "To Betty," he announced to our gathered family and friends, his voice thick with false emotion. "My devoted wife. The doctors may say we have only months left together, but every remaining moment will be cherished." The room filled with sympathetic murmurs and tearful glances. Our daughter Heather dabbed at her eyes, while our son Ethan squeezed my hand under the table. I smiled back at them all, nodding graciously while something cold and hard crystallized in my chest, because it was all a lie, a carefully constructed, meticulously planned lie. I wasn't dying. The medical reports Frank had been showing to our children, our friends, even our financial advisors were forgeries. I had discovered them 3 days ago in his home office safe. The combination was our wedding date, a sentimental touch that now seemed like the cruelest of ironies. As I raised my own glass in response, meeting Frank's eyes across the table, I made a silent toast of my own. To Diane Cooper, the attorney whose business card was currently nestled in my purse. Tomorrow she would help me begin dismantling the elaborate fiction my husband had created, and the life he thought was already his to inherit. The symptoms had started appearing 6 months ago. Not symptoms of illness, symptoms of betrayal. Small inconsistencies in Frank's behavior. Missing hours he couldn't account for. Strange calls that ended abruptly when I entered the room. Financial documents removed from our shared filing cabinet. At 67, I might have been retired from my career as a financial controller, but my mind remained as sharp as it had been during my 30 years managing the books for Hamilton and Reed Consulting. Burlington, Vermont had been our home for our entire married life. Frank's real estate development company had transformed parts of the city's waterfront, earning him respect and admiration throughout the community. I had stood beside him at every ribbon cutting, every charity gala, every community board meeting, the dutiful wife who had given up a promising career to support his ambitions and raise our children. "You look beautiful tonight," Frank whispered as he returned to his seat beside me, his hand possessively covering mine. "That blue brings out your eyes." I smiled, the muscles in my face straining with the effort. "Thank you, dear. I wanted tonight to be special. Special indeed." What Frank didn't know was that I had installed a small recording device under our dining room table 2 weeks ago, capturing his conversation with Tiffany Blake, his executive assistant and mistress of 11 years. I had listened to them discussing their future together, laughing about how my condition would accelerate their plans. How convenient that I would be gone before I could discover the offshore accounts where Frank had been siphoning company profits for years. Profits that rightfully belonged, in part, to me. "Mom, we've been thinking." Heather leaned across the table, her voice dropping to a whisper. "You should move in with us. We have plenty of room, and with your health." "That's very sweet, honey," I replied, patting her hand. "But your father and I have everything under control. Dr. Ramirez has been wonderful." Another lie. Dr. Gloria Ramirez had never diagnosed me with anything more serious than seasonal allergies and mild arthritis. The woman Frank had introduced to our children as mom's specialist was an imposter, someone he had paid to corroborate his story. I had confirmed this with a single phone call to the real Dr. Ramirez's office. The dinner proceeded with excruciating slowness. Course after course of exquisite food that tasted like ash in my mouth. Anecdotes and reminiscences about our life together, each one now tainted by the knowledge of Frank's betrayal. When he presented me with a diamond bracelet as an anniversary gift, I nearly choked on my wine. Another prop in his elaborate performance of the devoted husband. "I love you," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear as he clasped it around my wrist. "I always will." 42 years, and I had never recognized the hollow sound of those words. Or perhaps I had simply chosen not to hear it. I had invested everything in our marriage, my youth, my ambitions, my identity. When the children came, I had gladly stepped back from my career to raise them, believing Frank's assurances that we were building something together, that my contribution was valued, even if it didn't come with a paycheck or professional accolades. When dessert finally arrived, Frank proposed another toast. To all of you, our beloved friends and family, thank you for supporting us through this difficult time. I watched him in silent fascination. His performance was flawless, the slight crack in his voice, the momentary glance downward as if gathering his composure. Had he always been this skilled at deception? Had I simply been the most gullible of audiences? The evening eventually wound down. As we said our goodbyes in the restaurant's elegant foyer, my closest friend Pam Sullivan hugged me fiercely. "I'm here for you," she whispered. "Whatever you need." Pam had been my neighbor for 20 years. She had witnessed the subtle diminishment of my spirit over time, the way Frank interrupted me at dinner parties, dismissed my opinions, controlled our social calendar. She had tried to warn me in her gentle way, but I hadn't been ready to listen. "I'll call you tomorrow," I promised, meaning it more than she could know. The drive home was silent. Frank turned on the classical music station. Vivaldi, my favorite. Another performance. I gazed out the window at the familiar streets of Burlington, wondering how many times he had driven this same route with Tiffany beside him instead of me. "You seem quiet," he observed as we pulled into the driveway of our lakefront home. "Are you feeling all right?" "Just tired," I said. "It was a lovely evening." "You should rest," he replied, his concern so convincing that for a moment I almost believed it myself. "Why don't you take one of your pills?" The pills were vitamins. Frank had replaced my regular multivitamins with identical-looking tablets, telling me they were special supplements prescribed by Dr. Ramirez. I had been flushing them down the toilet for weeks, ever since I'd grown suspicious enough to have one analyzed by a lab. They contained nothing harmful that would have been too risky, but they weren't medication for any terminal illness. Inside our home, I excused myself to get ready for bed. In the master bathroom, I stared at my reflection in the mirror. My silver-streaked hair was styled in the conservative bob Frank preferred. My makeup was tasteful, my jewelry understated. I looked exactly like what I was, or what I had allowed myself to become, the proper wife of a successful man. But in my eyes, I saw something different. Something hard and determined that Frank had never noticed, or had deliberately chosen to ignore. I changed into my nightgown and performed my usual bedtime routine, aware of Frank moving around in the bedroom. When I emerged, he was sitting on the edge of the bed, scrolling through his phone. "Tiffany sent some papers you need to sign tomorrow," he said without looking up. "Just some updates to your will and the living trust. Nothing urgent." Nothing urgent, just the final steps in his plan to secure my assets before my convenient passing. The familiar rage bubbled up inside me, but I swallowed it down. Not yet. "Of course," I said mildly. "I'll look at them in the morning." He set his phone on the nightstand and came to me, placing his hands on my shoulders. "I know this isn't easy," he said, his blue eyes, the same ones that had made me fall in love with him at 25. Now filled with calculated compassion. "But I promise I'll make these last months everything you deserve." I nodded, unable to speak past the knot of fury in my throat. He interpreted my silence as emotion and pulled me close, stroking my hair. I allowed myself to be held, my body rigid in his embrace. Later, after Frank had fallen asleep, I slipped out of bed and padded silently to the guest room where I had hidden a burner phone. I sent a text to Diane Cooper. "Meeting confirmed for 10 a.m. The response came immediately. "Everything in place. Be strong." I deleted the messages and returned the phone to its hiding place. Then I went to the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water, standing by the window that overlooked Lake Champlain. The moon cast a silver path across the dark water, reminding me of the life I had once imagined for myself, bright, expansive, full of possibility. Frank had systematically narrowed that path, year by year, decision by decision. He had isolated me from colleagues who might have supported my career advancement. He had subtly undermined my confidence in my professional abilities. He had insisted that our social life revolve around his business connections rather than my intellectual interests. And I had allowed it, making excuses for his behavior, rationalizing each small surrender as necessary for our family's stability and success. I had believed we were partners, even as the ground beneath my feet shifted from equal footing to increasingly precarious terrain. No more. I returned to our bedroom and slipped back into bed beside the man who had planned my fictional death with such care. Tomorrow would be the first day of my new life, a life reclaimed from the ashes of betrayal. As I closed my eyes, I wasn't planning revenge. What I wanted was justice, and I had spent 42 years learning exactly how Frank Lawson's mind worked. I knew every vulnerability, every fear, every secret he thought was hidden. I knew where the financial bodies were buried because I had watched him dig the graves, one creative accounting decision at a time. I might have been silent, but I had never been blind, just unwilling to see. The morning arrived with golden autumn sunlight streaming through our bedroom windows. I had slept surprisingly well, buoyed by the certainty of my decision. Frank was already gone. Thursday was his early golf game with the mayor and several city council members whose votes he needed for his latest development project. I dressed carefully in a tailored charcoal suit I had purchased secretly online. Not my usual pastels and florals, but something with structure and authority. I styled my hair differently, swept back from my face instead of the soft waves Frank preferred. Small rebellions, but they felt significant. On my way out, I paused in front of the large family portrait hanging in our foyer. Frank and me flanked by Heather and Ethan at Heather's wedding 8 years ago. We looked perfect. The successful businessman, the supportive wife, the accomplished children. A tableau of upper-middle-class American success. But I knew better now, and soon they all would too. Diane Cooper's law office occupied the top floor of a renovated mill building in downtown Burlington. The exposed brick walls and industrial windows spoke of authenticity and strength. Qualities I was trying to reclaim within myself. "Betty," Diane greeted me with a firm handshake. She hadn't changed much since our college days, still whip-smart and direct, her silver hair cut in a no-nonsense bob, her gaze penetrating. "I wish we were meeting under better circumstances." "The circumstances are exactly what they need to be," I replied, settling into the chair across from her desk. For the next 2 hours, I laid out everything I had discovered. The forged medical documents, the recorded conversations between Frank and Tiffany, the financial irregularities I had uncovered by accessing his poorly secured cloud storage. Decades as a financial controller had taught me to follow the money, and Frank's digital trail was surprisingly careless. Perhaps he had grown overconfident, or perhaps he simply couldn't imagine that I would ever question him. Diane listened without interruption, taking occasional notes. When I finished, she removed her reading glasses and leaned forward. "He's committed fraud, identity theft, and potentially tax evasion," she said. "Not to mention the emotional abuse. We have more than enough to not only divorce him, but potentially pursue criminal charges." "I don't want him in prison," I said, surprising myself with the steadiness of my voice. "I want him exposed. I want my children to know the truth. I want my share of what we built together, and I want my life back." Diane smiled, a slow, predatory curve of her lips. "Then let's make that happen. I've taken the liberty of assembling a team. Forensic accountant, private investigator, digital security expert. Frank won't know what hit him." "There's something else," I said, opening my purse. I removed a flash drive and placed it on her desk. 3 years ago, Frank asked me to notarize some documents for a land deal in New Hampshire. I kept copies. I believe he forged environmental impact statements to secure the permits. Diane's eyebrows rose. "That's a federal offense." "I know," I said quietly. "I didn't want to see it then, but I kept the evidence anyway. Some part of me had known, even then. Some part of me had been preparing for this day. As I left Diane's office, I felt lighter than I had in years. The autumn air was crisp, carrying the scent of fallen leaves and wood smoke. Burlington bustled around me. College students with backpacks, tourists admiring the lake views, business people hurrying to meetings. For so long, I had felt invisible among them, defined only by my relationship to Frank. Not anymore. My phone rang as I reached my car. Frank's name flashed on the screen. I took a deep breath and answered. "Where are you?" he demanded without preamble. "Tiffany brought those papers for you to sign." "I had an appointment," I said. "What appointment? I don't have anything on our calendar." "Our calendar," as if my time belonged to him. "I'll be home soon," I replied, not answering his question. A pause. "Are you okay? You sound different." I almost laughed. Now he noticed? "I'm fine, Frank. Better than I've been in a long time." As I ended the call, I caught sight of my reflection in the car window. I looked different. Straighter shoulders, chin lifted, eyes clear and focused. I looked like someone who had finally remembered who she was, and Frank Lawson had no idea what was coming. The grandfather clock in our foyer chimed 3 times as I walked through the front door. Frank and Tiffany were waiting in the living room, heads bent together over a stack of documents spread across the coffee table. They sprang apart when they heard my footsteps, like guilty teenagers caught in the act. "There you are," Frank said, his voice laced with irritation, barely concealed beneath a veneer of concern. "We've been waiting. Tiffany has other appointments." Tiffany Blake straightened her pencil skirt and offered me a practiced smile. At 41, she was everything I had once been. Ambitious, attractive, eager to please. But there was a hardness in her eyes that reminded me of Frank. They deserved each other. "I'm so sorry to hear about your health, Mrs. Lawson," she said, her voice dripping with synthetic sympathy. "Frank has been devastated." "I'm sure he has," I thought, noting the possessive way she said his name. No Mr. Lawson between them, not even in front of me. "Thank you for your concern," I replied, setting my purse down on the side table. "And for bringing these documents by personally. That's going above and beyond for an executive assistant." A flash of something, alarm, annoyance, crossed her face before she recovered. "Frank values my discretion in sensitive matters." "I bet he does." Frank gestured impatiently to the papers. "It's just as we discussed, Betty. Updates to your will and the living trust given the circumstances, and a healthcare proxy naming me as your decision-maker." I sat down across from them, taking my time, smoothing non-existent wrinkles from my skirt. "Of course, but I'll need to read through everything first." Frank's jaw tightened. "The lawyer explained everything when he drafted them. It's standard language." "Even so," I replied, picking up the first document. "Old habits from my controller days. I never sign anything I haven't read." An uncomfortable silence descended as I began to slowly review each page. I could feel Frank's impatience radiating across the coffee table. Tiffany checked her watch repeatedly. The documents were exactly what I had expected. A complete transfer of my assets and decision-making authority to Frank. If I signed these, he would control everything. Our lake house, my inheritance from my parents, my retirement accounts, even decisions about my medical care. The perfect setup for a husband planning to manage his wife's decline while siphoning away her resources. "I notice my children aren't mentioned as secondary healthcare proxies," I observed, looking up. "Shouldn't Heather or Ethan be authorized to make decisions if you're unavailable?" Frank waved a dismissive hand. "They're too emotional. They wouldn't be able to make objective decisions." "Unlike you," I thought bitterly. "And this clause about liquidating my personal investment portfolio," I continued. "Why would that be necessary?" "For your medical expenses," Frank replied smoothly. "The treatments we've been discussing aren't covered by insurance. Treatments that didn't exist for an illness I didn't have." "I see." I set the papers down. "I'll need time to review these more carefully. Perhaps I should consult with my own attorney." Frank's face darkened. "Your own attorney? Betty, we've used Patterson and Wilder for 20 years. Jim Patterson is your golf buddy and business associate," I pointed out. "Under the circumstances, I'd prefer independent counsel." Tiffany shifted uncomfortably. "Frank, I should go. I have that meeting at 4. "Fine." Frank stood abruptly. "I'll walk you out." They disappeared into the foyer, their voices dropping to urgent whispers I couldn't quite make out. I used the opportunity to snap photos of each document with my phone, then quickly replace them in their original order. When Frank returned, his expression was carefully controlled. "Who is this independent counsel you suddenly need to consult?" "Diane Cooper," I said, watching his reaction. "We went to college together." Recognition flickered in his eyes. "The divorce attorney? Betty, what are you playing at?" "I'm not playing at anything, Frank. I'm protecting myself." He sat down beside me, taking my hands in his. His voice softened to the persuasive tone I knew so well, the one he used when he wanted something. "Sweetheart, I know this is scary. Finding out you're sick, facing your mortality. But pushing me away isn't the answer. I'm here to take care of everything." I almost admired his performance. If I hadn't known the truth, I might have believed the concern in his eyes, the gentle pressure of his fingers against mine. "I'm not pushing you away," I lied, matching his sincerity with my own. I just need to understand what I'm signing. He relaxed slightly, believing he had diffused the situation. Take all the time you need. Just don't wait too long. Dr. Ramirez emphasized the importance of having these matters settled while you're still clear-headed. The thinly veiled threat wasn't lost on me. If I became difficult, how long before Frank would start suggesting I was experiencing cognitive decline? How long before our friends and children would be told that poor Betty was becoming confused, paranoid, unable to make rational decisions? Not long at all, I suspected. I'll have an answer for you tomorrow, I promised. He kissed my forehead. That's my girl, his girl, as if I were a possession, a pet, a child to be managed. Never an equal partner. After dinner, I pleaded fatigue and retired early, claiming I needed to take my medication. Once in our bedroom, I sent the document photos to Diane, along with a brief summary of the conversation. Her response was immediate and unequivocal. Sign nothing. At 9:30, my burner phone vibrated with a text from Ethan. Mom, are you awake? Can we talk? My son had always been more perceptive than his sister, more willing to question Frank's authority. I replied with my location, the gazebo by the lake, at the far end of our property. 20 minutes later, Ethan's tall figure appeared on the moonlit path. At 36, he had Frank's height, but my features, the same gray eyes and determined chin. As a professor of environmental science, he had chosen a career path that often put him at odds with his father's development business. Mom, he said, embracing me carefully, as if I might break. I've been worried. Dad said you weren't feeling well after the party. I'm fine, I assured him, patting the bench beside me. Just tired from all the excitement. He studied my face in the dim light. You look different. Not sick at all. That's because I'm not sick, Ethan. The words hung between us in the cool night air. Ethan's brow furrowed. What are you talking about? Dad showed us the diagnosis, the test results. Forgeries, I said simply. I've never been diagnosed with anything terminal. Ramirez, the real Dr. Ramirez, confirmed it. Ethan stared at me, disbelief warring with confusion on his face. Mom, that's insane. Why would Dad lie about something like that? To gain control of my assets before divorcing me for Tiffany. The bluntness of my response seemed to shock him. He stood up, pacing the small confines of the gazebo. Tiffany? His assistant? Mom, I think you might be confused. Maybe the medication? I'm not taking any medication because I don't need any, I interrupted. The pills your father gives me are vitamins. I had them tested. Tested? Mom, do you hear yourself? This sounds paranoid. I had anticipated this reaction. For Ethan's entire life, Frank had been the authority figure, the decision-maker, the voice of reason. The idea that his father could orchestrate such an elaborate deception was beyond his comprehension. I pulled out my phone and played the recording I had made 2 weeks earlier. Frank and Tiffany discussing their future together, laughing about my non-existent illness. Ethan's face drained of color as he listened to his father's voice. Once Betty's gone, we'll have everything. The house, the accounts, all of it. And no one will question it because everyone will think she died of natural causes. Tiffany's response was equally chilling. What about the kids? They believe whatever I tell them. Always have. I stopped the recording. Ethan looked physically ill. There's more, I said quietly. Financial records, forged medical documents, witness statements from the real Dr. Ramirez. I've been gathering evidence for weeks. Ethan sank back onto the bench, his shoulders slumped. I can't believe this. Dad always said you were the one person he truly trusted, that you were his rock. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was. That's why he never thought I would question him. Does Heather know? I shook my head. Not yet. She's always been closer to your father. I'm afraid she won't believe me without irrefutable proof. She won't, Ethan agreed grimly. She thinks he hung the moon. We sat in silence for a moment, the gravity of the situation settling between us. What are you going to do? He finally asked. I'm meeting with a lawyer tomorrow, Diane Cooper. Recognition flickered in his eyes. The one who took down Senator Wilson in that huge divorce case? Mom, that's going to be nuclear. Your father has left me no choice. Ethan ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so reminiscent of Frank that it made my heart ache. He'll fight back. You know he will. And he fights dirty. I'm counting on it, I replied. That's when people make mistakes. My son looked at me with new eyes, as if seeing me clearly for the first time. You're not what I expected. What did you expect? I don't know. Tears? Hysteria? Not this. The calm determination that had carried me through decades in a male-dominated financial world. The strategic thinking that had helped Frank build his business, though he'd never acknowledged my contribution. The inner strength I had submerged beneath the identity of wife and mother. I spent 42 years being what everyone expected, I told him. Now I'm going to be myself. Ethan left an hour later, shaken but supportive. He promised to say nothing to Heather or Frank while I pursued legal action. As I watched him disappear down the moonlit path, I felt both lighter and heavier, relieved to have an ally in my son, but burdened by the pain my revelations had caused him. Back in the house, I found Frank waiting in our bedroom, his reading glasses perched on his nose as he reviewed some paperwork. "Where were you?" he asked without looking up. "Just getting some air by the lake, clearing my head." He grunted in acknowledgement. I saw Ethan's car in the driveway, so he had been watching. He stopped by to check on me. He's worried. We all are. Frank set his papers aside and fixed me with a penetrating stare. "Betty, I need to know what's going on with you. First the attorney, now these late-night meetings with Ethan. If there's something you're not telling me..." The irony was almost laughable. "Nothing important," I lied smoothly. "Just processing everything that's happening." He seemed to accept this, his expression softening. "Come to bed. You need your rest." I complied, going through the motions of my nighttime routine while my mind raced ahead to the next day's confrontation. As I lay beside Frank in the darkness, listening to his steady breathing, I wondered how many nights I had spent like this, physically close but emotionally isolated, married to a stranger wearing my husband's face. Morning arrived with a sense of inevitable confrontation. Frank left early for a breakfast meeting with investors, reminding me to think about those documents before he departed. The moment his car disappeared down the driveway, I called Diane. "Everything's in place," she assured me. "The forensic accountant has identified at least 3 offshore accounts Frank failed to disclose in your joint tax filings. The private investigator has surveillance photos documenting his relationship with Tiffany going back 7 years, and Dr. Ramirez has provided a sworn statement confirming she never diagnosed you with any terminal illness." "What time?" I asked. 11 o'clock at my office. Frank's assistant confirmed he'll be there, believing it's a meeting about a potential new development property. Heather and Ethan have also been contacted, though only Ethan knows the true purpose. My stomach clenched at the thought of Heather. My daughter had always idolized her father, modeling her aggressive corporate career after his. She would be devastated by his betrayal and potentially furious with me for exposing it. "Are you sure about this approach?" Diane asked, a rare note of hesitation in her voice. "We could proceed more discreetly." "No," I said firmly. "Frank has spent decades controlling the narrative. It's time everyone heard the truth at once, from me." After hanging up, I dressed with particular care, a deep burgundy suit I had purchased during my last business trip before retirement. Professional, authoritative, unapologetically bold, not the pastels and florals Frank preferred. I styled my hair straight and sleek, applied makeup that accentuated rather than minimized my features, and selected jewelry I had inherited from my mother rather than pieces Frank had given me. The woman who looked back at me from the mirror was both familiar and strange. The Betty Lawson I might have become if I hadn't surrendered pieces of myself year after year in the name of marital harmony. I arrived at Diane's office 15 minutes early. Her assistant, a young man with kind eyes, offered me water and asked if I needed anything else. "Just a moment to collect my thoughts," I replied. He nodded sympathetically. "Ms. Cooper said to tell you she has the conference room prepared exactly as you discussed." At 5 minutes to 11, he escorted me to a large room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Lake Champlain. Diane was already there, elegant in a charcoal suit, her silver hair gleaming under the recessed lighting. Beside her sat a distinguished man in his 60s whom she introduced as Edward Harrington, the forensic accountant. "He's found some very interesting patterns in your husband's financial activities," Diane explained. patterns that the IRS will find equally interesting. A knock at the door announced the arrival of Dr. Gloria Ramirez, the real one, a petite woman with warm brown eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. She greeted me with a firm handshake. "Mrs. Lawson, I want you to know how disturbed I was to learn someone has been impersonating me and fabricating medical records in my name. I've already filed a report with the medical board and the police." "Thank you for coming," I said. "I know this puts you in an awkward position." She shook her head firmly. "No one should be told they're dying when they're not. It's unconscionable." At precisely 11, the door opened again. Frank entered first, his confident stride faltering slightly when he saw me seated at the head of the conference table. Behind him came Tiffany, her expression shifting from professional neutrality to alarm as she took in the assembled group. "Betty?" Frank's voice held a mixture of confusion and the first stirrings of anger. "What is this?" Before I could respond, Ethan and Heather appeared in the doorway. My son's face was grim with foreknowledge. My daughter looked utterly bewildered. "Mom? Dad? What's going on?" Heather asked, her gaze darting between us. "That's what I'd like to know," Frank said coldly, directing his glare at me. "Betty, if this is some kind of ambush—" "Not an ambush," I interrupted calmly. "A reckoning." Diane gestured to the remaining chairs. "Please, everyone have a seat. This meeting won't take long, but it is necessary." Frank remained standing, his body tense with barely controlled fury. "I don't know what game you're playing, Betty, but I'm not participating. Come on, Heather, Ethan, we're leaving." "Actually," I said, my voice stronger than I had expected, "I think you'll want to stay for this, Frank. Unless you'd prefer the IRS, the FBI, and the Burlington Police Department hear about your activities before you do." The color drained from his face. Beside him, Tiffany clutched her designer handbag like a shield. "Mom?" Heather's voice was small, uncertain. "What are you talking about?" I looked at my daughter, so accomplished, so confident in her corporate world, yet still seeking her father's approval in everything she did, just as I had done for too many years. "Sit down, sweetheart," I said gently. "There are some things you need to know." For the next 30 minutes, I laid out the evidence Diane and I had accumulated. The forged medical records, the offshore accounts, the falsified environmental impact statements, the recorded conversations revealing Frank and Tiffany's plan. Frank denied everything at first, his voice rising in righteous indignation. But each piece of evidence silenced him further, until he sat rigidly in his chair, a muscle ticking in his jaw, his knuckles white where they gripped the armrests. Heather wept silently, mascara tracking down her cheeks. Ethan stared at the table, his expression a mixture of disgust and resignation. Tiffany looked like she might be sick. When I finished, the room was silent except for the soft hum of the ventilation system. Finally, Frank spoke, his voice dangerously quiet. "You've been planning this for weeks, behind my back, spying on me, recording private conversations. If anyone has committed a crime here, it's you." "Vermont is a one-party consent state for recordings," Diane interjected smoothly. "And as for the rest, I believe self-defense is the appropriate term. Your wife was protecting herself from your criminal conspiracy." Frank's eyes never left my face. "What do you want, Betty? Money? The house? Name your price." "This isn't a negotiation," I replied. "It's a notification. As of this morning, I have filed for divorce on grounds of fraud and emotional cruelty. I have also filed complaints with the relevant authorities regarding your financial misconduct and the forged medical documents." "You'll get nothing," he spat. "I built everything we have. You were just along for the ride." 42 years reduced to along for the ride. The casual cruelty of it stole my breath for a moment. "That's not how the courts will see it," Diane said, "especially once they review the evidence of your attempt to defraud Mrs. Lawson of her rightful assets by fabricating a terminal illness." Frank turned to our children, his expression shifting to one of paternal concern. "Heather, Ethan, you can't believe this. Your mother is confused, possibly experiencing early dementia. That's why I've been trying to secure her healthcare proxy to protect her." Heather looked up, her tear-stained face uncertain. Always the daddy's girl, always eager to believe the best of him. But Ethan shook his head slowly. I heard the recordings, Dad. I saw the forged documents. It's over. Frank's facade cracked then, revealing the rage beneath. He slammed his hand on the table. You ungrateful little— That's enough, I interrupted, my voice cutting through his outburst. This meeting is concluded. Diane will contact your attorney with the next steps. As everyone began to gather their things, I remained seated, watching Frank. The man I had married, had children with, had built a life alongside. The man who had been planning my fictional death while sleeping beside me every night. He leaned close as he passed my chair, his voice a venomous whisper. You think you've won? This is just the beginning. I will destroy you, Betty. When I'm done, you'll wish you really were dying. I met his gaze steadily. No, Frank, this isn't the beginning. It's the end. And the only thing dying today is the power you thought you had over me. As he stormed out, Tiffany trailing uncertainly behind him, I felt a strange sense of calm descend. The worst was over. The truth was out. Heather approached me hesitantly, her professional composure shattered. Mom, I don't understand. Why didn't you tell me what was happening? Would you have believed me? I asked gently. Her silence was answer enough. We have a lot to talk about, I said, standing to embrace her. But not here, not now. As we left the conference room, Diane touched my arm. This is just the first step, Betty. Frank will fight back, and it won't be pretty. I know, I replied. But for the first time in decades, I'm fighting too. And unlike Frank, I have nothing to hide. Walking out of the building into the bright autumn sunshine, I took my first deep breath as a woman reclaiming her life. Whatever came next, legal battles, financial investigations, family turmoil, I would face it standing tall. Not as Frank Lawson's wife, but as Betty Lawson, a woman who had finally raised her glass not to false endings, but to her own true beginning. The first blow came at dawn, 3 days after the confrontation in Diane's office. I was awakened by the harsh buzz of my phone vibrating against the nightstand of my temporary apartment. A sleek, minimalist space downtown that Diane had arranged through a discreet property management company. The caller ID showed Ethan's number. Mom, his voice was tight with urgency. You need to check the News Register website, now. Fully awake in an instant, I reached for my laptop. The Burlington News Register's homepage loaded to reveal a headline that sent ice through my veins. Prominent developer Frank Lawson alleges wife's mental decline behind fabricated divorce claims. The accompanying photo showed Frank looking appropriately somber outside our home, his arm protectively around Heather's shoulders. My daughter's face was partially turned away from the camera, but her presence beside him spoke volumes. The article quoted Frank extensively, describing his heartbreak over my rapid cognitive decline and paranoid delusions that had emerged alongside my supposed terminal illness. According to him, I had become increasingly unstable, imagining conspiracies and making outlandish accusations against the husband who had devoted his life to caring for me. It's not uncommon for patients facing mortality to experience psychological breaks, Frank was quoted saying, attributing this insight to medical experts familiar with the case. My only concern is getting Betty the help she needs during her remaining time. The calculated cruelty of it stole my breath. He had weaponized my non-existent illness, turning it from a fiction designed to steal my assets into a shield against my accusations and a sword aimed at my credibility. He's laying groundwork for a competency challenge, Ethan said grimly when I finally found my voice. If he can convince a court you're mentally incompetent, then everything I've said becomes questionable, and he could still end up with control of my affairs, I finished, the legal implications crystallizing in my mind. Where are you now? At my place. Dad's been calling nonstop, trying to get me to make a statement supporting his version. He doesn't know I'm still talking to you. And Heather? Ethan's silence told me everything. She's staying at the house, he finally admitted. She says she's trying to understand both sides, but, Mom, you know how she is with Dad. She's always believed whatever he tells her. The pain was sharp, but not surprising. Heather had built her identity around being Frank's daughter, emulating his business acumen, seeking his approval, adopting his worldview. Asking her to accept his betrayal was asking her to question her own life choices. Keep your distance from your father for now, I advised Ethan. Don't let him manipulate you into saying anything publicly. I need to call Diane. Diane answered on the first ring, her voice alert despite the early hour. I've seen it, she said without preamble. We anticipated this move, but not quite so quickly. He must be more desperate than we thought. He has Heather on his side. Temporarily, Diane said with confidence that I couldn't quite share. Once we release the evidence packet to the court, it becomes public record. Frank knows that. This media offensive is his attempt to get ahead of the story, to prime the public to dismiss your evidence as the fabrications of a disturbed mind. What's our counter move? We accelerate. I'm filing for an emergency hearing this morning. And Betty, her voice softened slightly, this is going to get worse before it gets better. Are you prepared for that? Was I? The Betty of 6 months ago would have crumbled under the public scrutiny, the gossip, the pitying glances. That Betty had derived her sense of self from her role as Frank's wife, the mother of his children, the perfect hostess at his business dinners. That Betty would have done anything to avoid conflict, but that Betty was gone. I've lived with worse for 42 years, I told Diane. At least now it's out in the open. I spent the morning fielding concerned calls from friends who had seen the article. Most expressed shock and offered support, but I could hear the doubt in some voices, the subtle hesitation that suggested Frank's narrative had found purchase in fertile ground. After all, wasn't it more believable that a 67-year-old woman was experiencing mental decline than that her respected, successful husband had orchestrated an elaborate plot to defraud her? Around noon, my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. It was Pam Sullivan calling from a hotel in Boston. Betty, thank God. I've been trying to reach you since I saw the news. Pam? Why are you in Boston? Because your darling husband fired me yesterday. Effective immediately with security escorting me from the building. I sat down heavily on the sleek leather sofa. He fired you? But you've been office manager at Lawson Development for 15 years. Apparently, I've demonstrated poor judgment and disloyalty to the company. Translation. He knows we're friends and suspects I might support your version of events. Another casualty of Frank's scorched earth approach. Pam was a single mother who had put her daughter through college on her salary from Lawson Development. Pam, I'm so sorry. Don't you dare apologize, she interrupted fiercely. This isn't your fault. It's his. And honestly, it's almost a relief. I've watched that man manipulate and belittle you for years, Betty. Watched you shrink yourself to fit into the box he built for you. I'm just glad you finally found your way out. Her unwavering support brought tears to my eyes. Where will you go? What will you do? I'm staying with my sister for now. As for what's next? Well, that depends. On what? On whether you might need an assistant who knows where all Frank Lawson's metaphorical bodies are buried. Someone who's maintained the company files for 15 years and might have kept her own copies of certain interesting documents. A slow smile spread across my face. Pam Sullivan, are you offering to help me take down your former boss? I prefer to think of it as correcting the historical record, she replied with a hint of mischief. Besides, revenge and gainful employment in one package? How could I resist? By the time I met with Diane that afternoon, the situation had escalated further. Frank had called an emergency board meeting at Lawson Development and suspended all my access to company accounts and properties, including our home. My key cards had been deactivated, my company email shut down, my name removed from the company website where I had been listed as founding partner, despite never holding an official title. He's trying to erase you, Diane observed as we reviewed the updates in her office. Professionally, financially, socially. It won't work, I said with more confidence than I felt. Too many people know the truth. Speaking of which, Diane pushed a folder across her desk. Pam Sullivan contacted me directly. These are copies of internal memos and emails from Lawson Development going back 12 years. They document Frank's systematic exclusion of you from company decisions despite your substantial financial contributions to starting the business. They also contain some very interesting communications regarding the New Hampshire land deal. I leafed through the documents, recognizing Frank's distinctive writing style in emails where he discussed how to manage Betty's expectations and keep her occupied with charity work while he made the real decisions about the company we had built together. Is this enough? I asked. Combined with the financial evidence and the medical fraud? More than enough for the divorce case. Diane leaned forward. But Betty, these documents also suggest securities fraud and tax evasion at a level that could trigger criminal charges. Are you prepared for that possibility? The question gave me pause. Despite everything, Frank was still the father of my children. The prospect of seeing him in prison carried a weight I hadn't fully considered. Let's focus on the divorce and financial settlement first, I decided. If criminal charges become necessary to protect my interests, then so be it. Diane nodded, respecting my hesitation. The emergency hearing is scheduled for tomorrow morning. Judge Harriet Coleman, she's fair, experienced, and notably unsympathetic to claims of female hysteria, which is undoubtedly the card Frank's attorneys will play. What should I expect? They'll push for a competency evaluation, claiming your accusations demonstrate paranoia and delusion. We'll counter with Dr. Ramirez's testimony about the forged medical records and present our evidence of financial fraud. It will be intense, but brief. These hearings typically last less than an hour. And Heather? Will she be there? Diane's expression softened. Frank's attorneys have listed her as a potential witness regarding your mental state. I'm sorry, Betty. I know how painful this must be. The thought of my daughter testifying against me created a physical ache in my chest. But I refused to be derailed by emotion. Frank was counting on my maternal instincts to weaken my resolve. Then we proceed as planned, I said firmly. Heather has to make her own choices. That evening, I found myself drawn to the waterfront park near my temporary apartment. The October air was crisp, carrying the scent of fallen leaves and wood smoke from lakeside fire pits. Families strolled along the promenade. Couples walked hand in hand. Tourists snapped photos of the sunset painting Lake Champlain in shades of gold and crimson. Normal life continuing all around me while mine had been upended. There was something both comforting and disorienting about witnessing this ordinary beauty. I was so absorbed in my thoughts that I didn't notice the figure approaching until she spoke. Mom? Heather stood a few feet away, bundled in the camel haircoat I had given her last Christmas, her blonde hair, so like Frank's in his younger days, pulled back in a sleek ponytail. Her expression was a complex mixture of uncertainty, defiance, and pain. Heather, I managed, my voice steadier than I expected. I didn't think I'd see you before tomorrow's hearing. She glanced around nervously. Dad doesn't know I'm here. He thinks I'm having dinner with a client. But you wanted to see me? I observed. Why? My daughter had always been direct in business, but conflict avoidant in personal matters, another trait she shared with Frank. Now she seemed to be struggling to find the right words. Is it true, she finally asked, about Dad and Tiffany? About the fake medical reports? You've seen the evidence, I reminded her gently. You were in the room. I know, but... She wrapped her arms around herself, a protective gesture I recognized from her childhood. It's just so hard to believe. Dad has always been so... Dad. Confident. Successful. In control. Yes, I agreed. He has. And you've always supported him. Been there for him. For us. You never complained. The simple observation landed like a blow. I had never complained. I had absorbed Frank's controlling behavior, his dismissiveness, his gradual erasure of my independence, all without protest. What example had I set for my daughter? I should have, I said quietly. For my sake, and for yours. Heather's eyes widened slightly. For mine? What have I taught you about marriage, about partnership, by accepting the way your father treated me? What have I taught you about your own worth as a woman? She looked away, blinking rapidly. He says you're confused, that the stress of your illness... I'm not ill, Heather. I never was. Those documents were forged. Dr. Ramirez has confirmed it. But why would Dad do something like that? It doesn't make sense. Money, control, the freedom to start a new life with Tiffany without the messiness of a divorce settlement. I stepped closer, willing her to meet my eyes. You're an executive, Heather. You understand strategic planning. Think about it objectively. What would your father gain if everyone believed I was dying? I could see her analytical mind working, applying the same business logic she used every day to this deeply personal situation. The doubt in her expression deepened. He'd get everything, she whispered. Your share of the company, the house, the investments, and everyone would see him as the devoted husband who stood by his dying wife. Exactly. She shook her head, as if trying to dislodge the realization. But he's my father. He's always protected us, provided for us. Yes, he has, I acknowledged. And he loves you in his way. That hasn't changed. But Heather, loving his children doesn't mean he's incapable of betraying his wife. Tears spilled down her cheeks then, silent and restrained. I wanted to reach for her, to hold her as I had when she was small, but I sensed she needed space to process this shift in her understanding. I don't know what to do, she admitted, vulnerability breaking through her professional facade. He wants me to testify tomorrow, to say you've been acting strangely, showing signs of confusion. And have I? I asked quietly. She met my gaze directly for the first time. No, you're more clear and focused than I've seen you in years, more yourself. The observation startled me with its insight. I realized. I am more myself. We stood in silence for a moment, the weight of decision heavy between us. I can't testify against him, Heather finally said. He's still my father, but I can't testify against you either. Not now, not knowing what I know. It wasn't everything I had hoped for, but it was a start. I understand. I need time, Mom, to figure out where I stand in all this. Take all the time you need, I told her. I'll be here when you're ready. She nodded, then surprised me by stepping forward and embracing me briefly, fiercely, before turning and walking quickly away. I watched her go, hope and heartache mingling in my chest. The courthouse steps were crowded with reporters the next morning. Frank had clearly alerted the media to the hearing, another calculated move to shape public perception. I spotted him across the plaza, surrounded by a protective phalanx of attorneys, his expression appropriately grave for the cameras. Tiffany was noticeably absent. Ignore them, Diane muttered as we approached the entrance. Focus on Judge Coleman. She's the only audience that matters today. The courtroom was smaller than I had imagined, with wood-paneled walls and uncomfortable benches. Frank and his legal team occupied one side, Diane and I the other. Ethan slipped in at the last moment, sitting directly behind me in silent support. There was no sign of Heather. Judge Coleman, a stern-faced woman in her 60s with steel-gray hair and penetrating eyes, entered and called the emergency hearing to order with brisk efficiency. Frank's lead attorney, Howard Wilkins, rose first. He painted a heart-wrenching picture of a devoted husband watching his beloved wife deteriorate both physically and mentally, making increasingly paranoid accusations as her condition worsened. Mrs. Lawson's claims are not merely false, Your Honor, but symptomatic of her declining cognitive state, Wilkins argued smoothly. We have grave concerns about her capacity to make sound legal and financial decisions at this time. We are requesting a full competency evaluation before these divorce proceedings can continue. Judge Coleman listened impassively, then turned to Diane. Counselor? Diane approached the bench with confident steps. Your Honor, Mr. Wilkins has presented a compelling fiction, much like the fiction Mr. Lawson created about my client's health. We are prepared to demonstrate that not only is Mrs. Lawson completely competent, but that her husband has engaged in a systematic campaign to defraud her by fabricating a terminal illness. She presented the affidavit from Dr. Gloria Ramirez, confirming that she had never diagnosed me with any terminal condition and that the medical reports bearing her signature were forgeries. She followed with the recording of Frank and Tiffany discussing their plans for after Betty's gone. Frank's face remained impassive, but I could see the tension in his jaw, the slight narrowing of his eyes as the evidence mounted. Wilkins attempted to object several times, but Judge Coleman overruled him, her expression growing increasingly grave as the pattern of deception became clear. When Diane introduced the financial evidence, the offshore accounts, the diverted company funds, the doctored tax returns, Frank leaned over and whispered urgently to Wilkins. The attorney's shoulders stiffened visibly before he stood. Your Honor, in light of this information, we would like to request a brief recess to confer with our client. Judge Coleman checked her watch. You have 15 minutes, Counselor. As Frank and his legal team filed out, Diane turned to me with a small, satisfied smile. They're rattled. That's good. When the hearing resumed, the shift in strategy was immediate and dramatic. Wilkins adopted a conciliatory tone, suggesting that misunderstandings had occurred on both sides and proposing a temporary financial agreement while the parties worked toward an amicable resolution. Judge Coleman was having none of it. "Counselor, what I've heard today goes well beyond misunderstandings. The evidence suggests your client has engaged in financial fraud, identity theft, and potentially criminal conspiracy. I'm denying the request for a competency evaluation and granting temporary financial support to Mrs. Lawson from the marital assets, effective immediately." She fixed Frank with a stern gaze. "Mr. Lawson, I strongly suggest you reconsider your approach to these proceedings. This court takes a very dim view of the kind of manipulation evidenced here today. We will reconvene for a full hearing in 2 weeks. Until then, all marital assets are frozen, except for the support payments I've outlined. Am I clear?" Frank nodded stiffly, his expression carefully controlled, but fury evident in every line of his body. As the courtroom emptied, I felt a strange sense of anticlimactic relief. The first battle had been won, but the war was far from over. Frank would regroup, revise his strategy, strike back in ways I couldn't yet anticipate. Outside on the courthouse steps, reporters surged forward, shouting questions. Frank had already departed through a side entrance, avoiding the media scrum. Diane fielded a few brief inquiries while I scanned the crowd, searching for Ethan. I found him standing at the edge of the plaza, deep in conversation with Heather. My heart leaped at the sight of my daughter. She hadn't attended the hearing, but she was here now, her expression troubled but resolute as she listened to whatever Ethan was telling her. When she looked up and saw me watching, she didn't look away. It was a small victory, but perhaps the most meaningful one of the day. Later that evening, as I sat in my temporary apartment reviewing notes from the hearing with Diane and Pam, my phone chimed with a text message. It was from a number I didn't recognize. "This isn't over. You have no idea what you've started. Sleep well, Betty." I showed the message to Diane, who immediately began typing on her laptop. "I'm documenting this as potential harassment. Frank's getting desperate." "Desperate people are dangerous," Pam observed quietly. I set the phone down, refusing to let Frank's intimidation tactics affect me. So are angry women who've been pushed too far. The buzzer for the apartment's security system sounded, startling all three of us. The building had strict entry protocols. No one could reach my door without being cleared by the front desk. Diane moved to the intercom. "Yes?" "Package delivery for Mrs. Lawson," came the response. We exchanged wary glances. "I'm not expecting anything," I said. Pam peered through the peephole. "It's just the regular courier service the building uses. Should be safe." Diane opened the door cautiously. The young courier handed over a small padded envelope and departed with a cheerful, "Have a good evening." I examined the package carefully. It was addressed to me, with no return information. The postmark was local, dated yesterday. "Let me open it," Diane offered, her tone cautious. Inside was a thumb drive and a handwritten note on expensive stationery. "You'll want to see this. I'm sorry I didn't speak up sooner. TB Tiffany Blake." We gathered around Diane's laptop as she inserted the drive, running a quick virus scan before opening its contents. It contained a single video file dated 3 years ago. The video showed Frank in his office, seated behind his desk, speaking directly to the camera. His expression was serious, almost solemn. "If you're watching this, Tiffany, it means something has happened to me. I need you to know that I've made arrangements for you. The offshore account in the Caymans is in your name. The passwords are in the envelope with this video. There's enough there to take care of you for life." He leaned closer to the camera, his voice dropping conspiratorially. "Betty will never know. I've been moving company profits offshore for years. The dummy corporations, the inflated construction costs, the consulting fees to shell companies. It's all untraceable. By the time I'm done, the bulk of our assets will be completely shielded from taxes, from creditors, and from my wife." Frank's face broke into a cold smile. "She thinks the company was built on my vision. She has no idea how much of it was built on creative accounting. No idea at all." The video ended, leaving us in stunned silence. "Well," Diane finally said, her voice dry, "I believe we've just received Exhibit A for our case." "Why would Tiffany give us this?" Pam wondered. I thought of the tense moments in the courtroom, the urgent whispers between Frank and his attorneys, the abrupt change in strategy. "Because she's realized she's expendable. Frank is cutting her loose to save himself." Diane was already copying the file to her secure server. This changes everything. With this video, we have Frank's direct admission of financial fraud and tax evasion. The IRS and SEC will be very interested. And so will our children, I added quietly, thinking of Heather's troubled face outside the courthouse. This evidence would shatter any remaining illusions she had about her father. The truth was painful, but necessary, like lancing a wound to release the poison. As Diane and Pam discussed next steps, I moved to the apartment's wide windows, gazing out at the lights of Burlington reflected in the dark waters of Lake Champlain. Somewhere across that glittering expanse was the house I had called home for decades, filled with memories both bitter and sweet. I would never return there. That chapter was closed. For the first time, the realization brought not grief, but a sense of freedom. I had spent 42 years living in a beautiful cage of Frank's design. Now the door stood open, and beyond it stretched a future I was only beginning to imagine. Frank's threatening text glowed on my phone screen, still unanswered. I picked it up and typed a simple response. I know exactly what I've started. A new life without you in it. Then I blocked his number and turned back to the women who had become my allies in this unexpected battle. Whatever came next, I would face it not as Frank Lawson's wife, but as Betty Lawson. A woman reclaiming her power, one calculated move at a time. 3 months can change everything. As winter descended on Burlington, transforming the landscape into a pristine wonderland of snow and ice, my life underwent an equally dramatic transformation. The video Tiffany provided became the linchpin in both my divorce case and the subsequent federal investigation into Frank's business practices. 2 weeks after receiving it, I sat in a downtown conference room with representatives from the IRS, the Securities and Exchange Commission, and the U.S. Attorney's Office as they reviewed the evidence of Frank's extensive financial crimes. Mrs. Lawson, the lead investigator had said, studying me with careful eyes, "Were you aware of these offshore accounts during your marriage?" "No," I answered truthfully. I knew Frank was creative with his accounting, but I had no knowledge of the extent or the illegality. They believed me. My years as a financial controller with a spotless professional record working in my favor. But more importantly, they had Tiffany's full cooperation. After being unceremoniously fired and threatened by Frank when he discovered the missing video, she had turned state's witness, providing detailed documentation of years of financial fraud. The arrest came on a Tuesday morning in December. I learned about it not from the authorities but from Heather, who called me in tears from her office. "They took Dad away in handcuffs," she sobbed, "in front of everyone at the company. It's all over the local news." I had prepared myself for this moment, but the reality still landed like a physical blow. Despite everything Frank had done, some small part of me mourned for the man I had once loved, for the father of my children, for the life we had built together, however illusory it had proven to be. "Are you all right?" I asked my daughter, concerned more for her well-being than Frank's. "No," she admitted, "but I will be. We all will be." The "we" was significant. In the weeks following the courthouse confrontation, Heather had slowly found her way back to me. Our relationship was different now, more honest, more equal. She was beginning to see me not just as her mother, but as a woman with her own identity and strength. And I was learning to see her as an adult, making her own difficult choices, not as an extension of her father. Frank's arrest accelerated the divorce proceedings. With criminal charges pending and his assets frozen by federal authorities, his leverage evaporated. His high-priced legal team abandoned him for more promising clients, leaving him with a court-appointed attorney who advised him to settle quickly. The terms were everything Diane had fought for: half of all legitimate marital assets, my full stake in Lawson Development, which would soon undergo a complete restructuring and rebranding, and complete financial separation moving forward. The offshore funds, once recovered by authorities, would largely go toward paying fines and restitution, with the remainder divided according to the divorce settlement. On a snowy January morning, I sat beside Diane in the same courtroom where our battle had begun, watching as Judge Coleman approved the final divorce decree. Frank wasn't present. He remained in federal custody, denied bail as a flight risk. "Congratulations, Betty," Diane said, as we descended the courthouse steps afterward. "You're officially a free woman." Free. The word resonated through me like a bell tone, clear and true. But freedom, I was discovering, was both exhilarating and terrifying. After decades of having my identity subsumed by my marriage, I now faced questions I had never allowed myself to consider. Who was Betty Lawson without Frank? What did I want from this unexpected chapter of my life? What would I build with my reclaimed time and resources? The answer began to take shape during a dinner with Pam, who had become not just an ally in my fight against Frank, but a true friend. "Remember when you used to talk about opening that financial literacy center for women?" she asked over glasses of Cabernet in my new Riverside condo. "Back when we first met, before Frank convinced you it was unrealistic?" I had almost forgotten that early dream. To create a place where women, especially those in or leaving difficult marriages, could learn to manage their finances independently. Frank had dismissed it as naive do-goodism, a waste of my professional expertise, and I had believed him. "It wasn't unrealistic," I said slowly, the old passion rekindling. "It was threatening, to him, to his control." Pam raised her glass. "Well, he's not in control anymore, is he?" 3 weeks later, I signed the lease on a modest office space downtown. With Pam as my operations manager and a small team of dedicated professionals, including several former Lawson Development employees who had reached out after Frank's arrest, the Burlington Women's Financial Empowerment Center was born. We offered free consultations, affordable workshops, and one-on-one counseling for women navigating divorce, widowhood, career transitions, or simply seeking financial independence. I drew on my years of experience as a financial controller, but also on my personal journey from dependence to autonomy. The day we opened our doors, Heather surprised me by appearing with a bouquet of lilies. My favorite, not the roses Frank always insisted on. "I'm proud of you, Mom," she said, looking around the bright, welcoming space with genuine admiration. "This is important work. Would you consider giving a workshop?" I asked impulsively. "Your expertise in corporate finance would be invaluable to our clients." The question seemed to catch her off guard. "You think I have something to offer?" "More than you know," I assured her. She agreed to think about it, a small step toward rebuilding not just our relationship, but her own sense of identity beyond Frank's daughter, Frank's corporate protégé. Ethan supported the center in his own way, connecting us with environmental and community organizations that shared our values of empowerment and education. He had emerged from the shadow of his father's legal troubles with a renewed commitment to his academic work and environmental advocacy. As winter gave way to spring, I settled into my new life with growing confidence. The center flourished, gaining clients and community recognition. My divorce was finalized. Frank remained in custody, awaiting trial, his reputation and empire in ruins. The Burlington society that had once revolved around him gradually adjusted to his absence and to my emergence as an independent entity. There were difficult moments, of course. Whispers still followed me at public events. Old friends sometimes avoided my gaze, uncomfortable with the stark reality of what had happened in a marriage they had viewed as ideal. The scandal periodically resurfaced in local media as Frank's legal case progressed. But these challenges seemed insignificant compared to what I had already overcome. I had faced my husband's betrayal, my daughter's temporary estrangement, public humiliation, and financial uncertainty. And I had emerged stronger, more authentic, more truly myself than I had been in decades. On a bright May evening, almost 7 months after the dinner where Frank had toasted my final days, I hosted a small gathering at my Riverside condo. Diane was there with her wife, along with Pam, Ethan, and his partner, Heather, and a few close friends who had stood by me through the ordeal. As the sunset painted the sky in shades of pink and gold, I raised my glass, not champagne, which I had come to associate with Frank's false celebrations, but a local craft cider that I had discovered and loved. "To new beginnings," I said, looking around at the circle of faces that represented my chosen family, "and to the truth that sets us free." Later, after the guests had departed, I stood on my small balcony overlooking the water. The night was clear, stars emerging in the darkening sky, the lights of Burlington twinkling along the shoreline. In the distance, I could just make out the silhouette of my former home, the lakefront property that would soon be sold as part of the federal case against Frank. I felt no regret as I gazed at its familiar outline. That house had been beautiful but confining, filled with expensive things but empty of true partnership or respect. My new home was smaller but entirely mine, chosen by me, arranged according to my preferences, filled with objects that reflected my taste rather than Frank's carefully curated image. My phone chimed with a text message from an unknown number. My heart stuttered briefly before I opened it, half expecting another threat from Frank's diminishing circle of allies. Instead, it was from Dr. Gloria Ramirez. Saw your center featured in the Burlington Free Press. Wondering if you might want a medical professional to talk about healthcare financial planning for women? No pressure. I smiled and typed back an enthusiastic acceptance. Another connection, another opportunity, another small expansion of the life I was building day by day. Frank had raised his glass to what he believed would be my end, the convenient death of a woman he had long ago stopped seeing as fully human. Instead, he had inadvertently toasted the beginning of my rebirth. As for me, I had raised my glass to the lawyer who helped me find justice, yes, but more importantly, I had raised it to myself, to the Betty Lawson who had finally emerged from decades of invisibility into the full light of her own power. And in that light, I intended to thrive. If you've been touched by my story, please hit that subscribe button. No one should face financial manipulation alone. I'm here to help you recognize the warning signs. Don't forget to share this video with someone who might need to hear it. Your support helps me reach more women who deserve their own fresh start, just like I found mine.